In this question, we're going to analyze the effects of fiscal policy in the Keynesian model. Okay, here's our long-run average supply curve. First, we need to label the axis. This is the price level axis. This is the real GDP axis. The flat line is a short-run average supply curve. And if you look right here, the slope of our short-run average supply curve is 0. And 0 times y is 0. So 0 plus 14 is 14. That's why the short-run average supply curve is a flat line at 14. Long-run average supply curve is a vertical line at the value of potential GDP because potential GDP is determined by real factors, capital, resources, the labor force, and technology. It is what it is, right? It doesn't matter what the price level is. The price level could be 0, and potential GDP is $23.5 trillion in this model. If the price level is 30, the potential GDP is still going to be 23.5. And then we have aggregate demand, and aggregate demand is a downward sloping line because the slope here is negative. So aggregate demand starts out at 20 here and then slopes down. The equilibrium can be found by setting short-run aggregate supply, which is just 14, equal to aggregate demand, and then solving for GDP, $20 trillion. Or we could use Desmos to do that. The aggregate demand curve here is 20 minus 0.3, and aggregate supply is 14. So come over here. Oh, I forgot to put my y there. Oh, Desmos, in order to graph a flat line, you have to use y equal, little lowercase y, to graph a flat line. So you can see at this height here, the height is 14, the height here is 14, right? The red line is our aggregate demand curve, and it crosses the short aggregate supply curve at 20. So GDP is 20 here. Okay? So GDP is 20. If I plug 20 into here, I get 14. If I plug 20 into here, I get 14. I can show you right here. So 20 minus 0.3 times 20 is equal to 14. See that? 0.3 times 20 is 6, right? And then 20 minus 6 is 14. Okay, so the price level is 14. The output gap is the difference between this 20, right? GDP of 20 and potential GDP of 23.5 is negative. So that means the unemployment rate is greater than the natural rate of unemployment, or the natural unemployment rate. Now the fiscal budget balance is 0 because up here we're assuming the fiscal budget is balanced. Okay? Okay, moving on. Now in this situation here, politicians want to push the economy back toward full employment. Senators and representatives compromise on a two-part fiscal stimulus. In stage 1, Congress passes an increase in government expenditure. Now this comes from a list that's below down here. So just pick one of the ones down there. And the one you want to pick is an increase in government spending. And that increase in expenditure is $0.5 trillion. The increase in government expenditures, right, increases G here in the model. And this thing right here is the thing in brackets is the intercept, right? The slope doesn't change, but the value of the intercept increases from, say, 20 to 20.5. See that? So the new equilibrium can be found by replacing the old demand curve with the new demand curve and setting that with equal to 14, which is the supply curve. Remember the short and anchor supply curve is 14 here. So we solve for real GDP, and we get 21.667, right? Now I can get that in Desmos, right? In Desmos, I can change this to 20.5, the new demand curve, and you can see that 21.667 is the new quantity of real GDP demanded at a price of 14. The price level is still 14. The gap has gotten smaller. This value here is 21.667. It's closer to the 23.5. That difference is a negative 1.833. Now the fiscal budget deficit was balanced, right? So the deficit was zero. Sorry. The deficit was zero, but so initially government spending equaled the taxes, right? So the deficit was zero, but we increased the government spending. So the deficit increases by the amount of the increase in government spending. So the deficit is now $0.5 trillion. Okay, which is why we put 0.5 there. So we're adding the original deficit to the increase in government spending to get us a new deficit of 0.5. Now GDP is still less than potential, so unemployment is still more than the natural rate. So unemployment rate is greater than the natural unemployment rate. The government spending multiplier is the change in GDP. GDP increased by, here, let me highlight that. GDP increased by that value. Maybe I should use yellow. Maybe that's a little better. So GDP went from 20 to 21.667. That difference is that value. And then the increase in government expenditure is 0.5. So the government spending multiplier is the increase in GDP over the increase in government spending. And when you take that ratio, you get a government spending multiplier of 3.333. Okay. And that implies that each $1 increase in government expenditures caused real GDP to increase by $3.33. Now, real GDP increased, right? It increased from 20 to 21.67. We can calculate the growth rate of GDP. 21.667 is where GDP is now. It was at 20. So we take what it is minus what it was, divide by what it was, times 100. And we get a percent change of 8.3%. The price level is unchanged because it was 14. It is 14. 14 minus 14 is 0, so the percent change is 0, right? Okay, now in stage 2, Congress changes the tax code that cuts taxes by $0.714 trillion. So now we're doing a tax cut here, a tax cut. And that pushes aggregate demand out to a new intercept of 21. So we get a new aggregate demand curve, this blue line, right? And that blue line results in the tax cut. When you cut taxes, the intercept goes the opposite direction. It goes up. Okay? So the new equilibrium is found by, well, let me move this here. Okay. Oh man. Okay, so this is the short and aggregate supply curve. This is the new aggregate demand curve. We set them equal to each other, solve for y, and we get 23.33. In Desmos, all we have to do is change this to 21. Whoop, sorry. We changed this down here to 21. Whoops, sorry. We changed that to 21, right? The aggregate demand curve shifted out, and the new GDP is 23.333 with a price level of 14. Okay. The output gap is even smaller. Potential GDP is 23.5. Real GDP is now 23.33. So the difference in these two values is the output gap. The difference between these two values is the output gap. This is what GDP should be, and this is what GDP is after that tax cut, which followed the increase in government spending. The fiscal budget is now even bigger. The deficit is now even bigger. Now we cut taxes, so the difference in those two things has gotten bigger, so we have to now add the deficit. I mean the tax cut. So the original deficit was 0. We had an increase in government spending of 0.5. Then we had a tax cut of 0.714. So when we add all that together, we get 1.214. Now the unemployment rate is still less than potential. So the unemployment rate is still greater than the natural rate of unemployment. The tax cut multiplier is the increase in GDP. GDP went from, now remember the 21.667 was the first stage, right? The increase in government spending. So when we do the tax cut, we're starting at a point where the GDP is 21.667, and then we're increasing GDP to 23.33 with a tax cut. So this change here in GDP is attributed to the tax cut, and it's 1.667. The tax cut taxes are cut by 0.714 trillion. So we have the tax cut dividing into that increase in GDP. And we get a tax cut multiplier equal to negative 2.33. It implies that each $1 reduction in taxes increases real GDP by $2.33. Now, real GDP increased from what it was at the end of stage 1 to what it is in stage 2. It went from 21.667 to 23.33. So GDP did increase. That's the increase in GDP, right? It is 23.333. It was 21.667. And then we take what it is minus what it was, divide by what it was, times 100, and we get a percent change of 7.7. The price level is unchanged. The percent change is 0. Okay? Let me erase that. Okay, so the absolute value of the tax cut multiplier and the government spending multiplier equals, so the tax cut multiplier was smaller than GDP multiplier, or the government spending multiplier, and it equals 0.7. Now, that 0.7, it's kind of interesting. Although I didn't give you this value in the problem, we know from previous problems that this 0.7 is the marginal propensity to consume. And in our model, in our assumption of our model, the slope of our demand curve is the MPS. And the MPS is 0.3. So 1 minus the MPS is the MPC, and that's 0.7. So it's no coincidence that the ratio of these two is 0.7. That's the MPC. Subtracting that from 1 gives us the slope of the aggregate demand curve in absolute value, and that's the MPS. So none of this is a coincidence, okay? And that's question 1 of fiscal policy.